This game might be the darkest featured on this channel yet. So sinister that I almost didn't make this video at all. Far from cozy, Midnight Scenes A Safe Place has a list of trigger warnings, and I urge you to click away if this video might cause you harm. But even gruesome stories deserve to be told. After all, it's in the dark when we confront our fears and face the monsters lurking within. Are you ready to face them with me? This is your spoiler and trigger warning, and if you're ready, sit back, get cozy, and let the nightmare begin. On a snowy night, Phil Larner, age 23, is sleeping, but something is wrong. Something unlocks his door, a pair of shadowy creatures with white eyes, holes in their heads, and sharp teeth covered in drool. And they're coming closer. Good thing it's all just a nightmare. Phil wakes covered in sweat. He's barricaded himself away in his bedroom for over a month, and he feels like a disappointment, hidden away in his parents' home. There are times when he wants to leave, to return to normal life, but the shadow monsters lurk in the dark beyond his door. They harass him day and night, and he can't help but wonder, what do they want from me? Is his sanity beginning to slip away? Phil's current life is not very pleasant. Never leaving his room, there are canned goods and a gas stove for cooking. There's also a pile of water bottles filled with urine and a bucket for excrement. He secures the bottles in a bag and attempts to lower them to the trash can outside his window using some fishing line. However, the wind is too strong and the bag gets stuck in a nearby tree. Phil tries to pull them loose but slices his palm open as he tugs on the fishing line. Woozy at the sight of blood, he falls to the floor unconscious, but wakes when he hears a knock at the door. The panic creeps in, even though it's only Phil's mother, checking on the noise. She's made him pancakes, his favorite. She continues knocking, but Phil holds his head, rocking back and forth, unable to open the door. "Your sister and I miss you very much," she calls out to him, "and your father is losing his patience." She pleads with Phil to come out, to eat breakfast together as a family like before. He wants to, but he can't. Sobbing, she leaves the pancakes at the door, knowing they'll still be there when she returns. They always are. Phil gets to work patching his wound, kind of. He places a dirty sock over it, feeling guilty that his mother is suffering all the while. At least she's trying to understand him, not like his father. He wants to tell her he feels safe in his room, but he's ashamed. The snow continues and Phil's hands feel frozen. He lights the heater, then passes the time by spying on the neighbors with his telescope. There's Mr. Timbers filling his car with gas and Mrs. Potter near the church. She's arguing with Father Adams over something, and he looks frightened as she waves her cane. Phil comments that she is a hardcore atheist, and Father Adams doesn't know who he's dealing with. Then there's Noelle Hayashi. Phil follows her as she walks through the snow and is greeted by her neighbor. Ugh, it's Brian. He doesn't have a chance with Noelle. Can't he see she's in a hurry? She passes the church and some mysterious red flecks in the snow. Well, that fight escalated fast. Noelle doesn't seem to notice though, and she enters the grocery store while Phil continues to think of her. She never judges him, or at least she hides her disgust well. He would work with her at her mother's grocery store to earn extra cash over the holidays. He really misses the life he had before all of this. Now the only time he sees Noelle is through his telescope and when she sneaks into his garden to deliver his groceries. If not for her, he would have died from hunger already. He finds himself thinking, she's such an extraordinary human being. He pulls himself away from the telescope and sits on his bed. Every day is the same, indistinguishable from the rest. Eat, sleep, watch TV, spy on the neighbors. But it's this routine that keeps Phil sane, and if his parents don't knock at the door, then he's considered it a good day. But by now, you're probably wondering the same thing I am. How long can Phil keep this up? And are these repetitive days actually keeping him sane, or not? Night falls and Phil is texting Noelle. She started watching weekly horror movies with him to distract and cheer him up. And it works to an extent, his day improving slightly, now that he's talking to her at least. She's his only friend left now. Noelle has been worried about him. It had been hours since he last logged on, but Phil has been really tired, dozing on and off a lot here lately. She offers Phil her therapist's number, hoping that this time he'll finally accept it. He'll think about it, meaning he's not ready yet. The movie continues and Noelle mentions that this year's Anime Con tickets are up for sale. Phil asks if she's going to go, but it just won't be the same without him, her loyal cosplay partner. He tells her to attend, to not break tradition, and he's sorry that he can't join her. They had put a lot of work into their costumes this year, and now he won't be able to share those moments with her. But Noelle seems confident they'll overcome his fears together, one step at a time, and he'll join her at the convention. Phil, on the other hand, doesn't think so. The movie ends, Noelle bids him goodnight, and Phil returns to his memories of her. This time she's crying in her room. Phil rushes over to comfort her, and as she cries, she says her father has been having an affair with one of his students and has confessed to her mother. Her father says he loves this girl and wants to start a new life with her, and ew. You're better off without him, Phil tells her. The Hayashi women are true warriors. He carries on with his uplifting speech, only for Noelle to tell him that it's the least comforting thing she's ever heard. But thank you, she says. I love you for trying. Phil sits, Noelle rests her head on his shoulder, and the memory ends. Morning takes its place. Phil wakes, wondering if this is his life from now on. He remembers he's low on supplies, so he goes online to place his order. Once he does so, Noelle will be by in the afternoon to deliver it. He feels like he's abusing her generosity, but seeing her up close brightens his day. He reads over his emails, further reminders of life before when he was a ski instructor and a university student. All of that now gone. He goes to submit his food order, only to learn his card has been canceled by his father. Suddenly, the room starts to vibrate and music blasts through the air. It's Piper, Phil's sister, in the next room. He beats on the wall to get her attention. She yells back, but he doesn't respond, so she taunts him, asking if he's a ghost because she assumed her brother had locked himself away in there and died. She tells him to come turn the music down himself if it's such a bother. She's a whirlwind, he thinks, but she does make our lives less boring. He remembers when Piper was first born, a tiny baby in the NICU, hooked up to wires and tubes. Phil, only a small boy, is afraid she'll die. He promises once she's discharged, he'll always be by her side to take care of her. But Piper has grown up to be difficult, having suffered their father's emotional and verbal abuse more than anyone would ever deserve. Phil tried to shield her from the brunt of it all, but now he's not out there protecting her, and he hates himself for it. The music vibrates the room, dropping bits of plaster from the ceiling onto the computer. Phil looks up to see a gaping crack. We zoom in. The room glows red, then fades to black. Phil wakes up. Another panic attack in full swing, and this time it's his father knocking on the door. He calls Piper a demon child and Phil a slacker, disrespectful good-for-nothings while he works hard to give them a good life. He lacks empathy toward Phil's situation and threatens further drastic measures if he doesn't leave the room soon. Mr. Larner is used to getting his way because his family is rich. Or at least they used to be. Phil's great-grandfather built a logging empire from the ground up, becoming the richest businessman in the region. Then his grandfather inherited the company and prospered, but Phil's father? In less than 10 years, he ruined the company and the lives of those who worked there. Ashamed of his failures, appearances are very important to Jacob Larner, and he'll do whatever it takes to look like the perfect family, even if it means hurting his children. Another day goes by locked away in Phil's room. Then Noelle texts him at night for another movie. She shares her streaming account with Phil since he can no longer afford his. Then they watch the movie and Noelle tells him that Brian finally asked her out. Phil wants to know what her answer was, and it seems that Noelle was dismissive, but Phil isn't having it. You didn't reject him, he asked. I thought you weren't interested. But Brian is cute, funny, and smart, and they've been talking a lot more lately. Phil and Noelle go back to watching the movie, then Noelle remembers that Phil never ordered food for the month. Realizing it's because of his bank account, she offers to speak with her mom about lending Phil some food, as they do the same with Mrs. Potter at the end of every month. You remember her, right? The one that may have murdered the priest? Phil calls Noelle his guardian angel, and before he can say more, she tells him he's not a burden, but just a guy going through a tough time. Later that night, Phil is sleeping, and we see his window slide open. It's one of the monsters from before, sliding into the room, climbing onto the bed with Phil. It opens its mouth, drool falling out onto his face. It growls, and Phil wakes in another panic. He left the TV on last night, and he sees the weather report. The snowstorm is substantial, his town not having seen one like this since 1964. He uses the telescope to see the storm. A bird pecks the lens and scares Phil, and me too, honestly. The bell from the church has fallen from the winds. Then Noelle walks to the store and is once again greeted by Brian. And Phil, you know, the guy peering at them through a telescope, calls Brian a stalker because he always comes outside to greet Noelle when she goes to work. His spying is interrupted as he hears Piper outside the door, fighting with their parents. Piper screams that she hates her mother and father, slamming her door and blaring her music once again. Her mother cries, asking Jacob if they're horrible parents. Both children hate them, and she hears their friends and neighbors in church whispering about what's happening in this house. Jacob calls Piper and Phil ingrates, but he'll find a way to keep them in check. The Lord is testing them as parents, but he knows they're doing a good job. His parents leave, and Phil talks to Piper through the wall. She's angry because her parents don't approve of Jake, her ex-boyfriend. They talked to Jake's parents, scared him, and now Jake is dating another girl. Piper says her father rejoices in her humiliation, and her mother is too stupid to care. She feels like she's drowning in this house. And just when she needs Phil the most, he's locked himself away, and she's never felt more alone. "You're shitty just like them," she tells Phil before walking away. Then the lights go out, a blackout from the storm maybe, but the computer is still on, its screen glowing red. It prompts Phil to find a password using a hidden word puzzle. Prospero is the correct answer. Another game opens. This time, the puzzle Inferno is one in which he must put together a broken image of Piper. Once the puzzle is completed, Piper's eyes glow red and flash, her teeth fall out, and blood flows from her eyes while she cries. It's horribly gruesome, but once again, Phil wakes to his alarm and another panic attack. He feels like the shadows in his dreams are trying to show him something. But what? It's growing even colder outside, the temperature a frigid -2 due to the storm. His activity is also decreasing, his health app warning him of his sedentary lifestyle. He's out of food and starving, hoping that Noelle will bring him more soon. He tries to light the heater, but of course it's out of gas. Then someone slides a note under his door. It's from Piper. She's apologizing for calling him shitty. She didn't mean it, it's just sometimes she's so lonely and overwhelmed, but she loves him. He thanks her from the wall, telling her he'll be there for her no matter what. She calls him Phil's ghost and tells him to go back to sleep in his coffin, done with being sentimental. Then the power goes out again. He can hear his father searching for a flashlight. He looks outside to see a town-wide blackout. Mr. Timbers doesn't seem to mind as he's filling up his car again, and there are some mysterious flashing lights in the church. At Noelle's house, though, there's a flash and a bang, like a gun being fired. Then we see a monster slither from her house, rifle in hand, as it leaves. Phil wakes in a panic once again. At this point, it's becoming difficult for Phil and for the player to separate reality from a dream. What's real and what is a result of Phil's night terrors? We need a breather to slow down from all the chaos before things get a lot worse. The new day is Noelle's birthday, and she's gifted a pair of Anime Con tickets from her mother. Brian messages her, wishing her happy birthday, and she's touched he remembers. He wants to hang out later, and we learn that Phil's dislike of Brian is mutual. Noelle talks to Father Adams briefly on her way to work, then with her mother at the store about inviting Brian to the convention, since Phil may not be well enough in time to go. She also asked if they could give Phil some food, but her mother declines. The Larners are wealthy and have each other for support. Mrs. Potter has no one. Noelle decides to buy him food with her own money, and we can see her walking toward his house later that day with grocery bags in hand. She passes by a bloody snow pile, and since we saw Father Adams earlier, maybe he killed Mrs. Potter. Noelle disregards it and leaves the bags for Phil, throwing a rock at his window to get his attention. He thanks her from his window and she leaves. Phil then texts her, telling her she's the best, but with the monotony of his day-to-day and no calendar, has forgotten it's her birthday. She jokes he now owes her money for the groceries and a gift, especially since she added a chocolate bar with hazelnuts as a special treat for him. He restocks his closet, now full thanks to Noelle, and eats the chocolate bar. There's another knock at the door. This time it's Phil's mother and Father Adam. He tries to speak with Phil to pray for him, but like always, a panic attack ensues and Phil can't open the door. The Lord tests our resilience by putting challenges in front of us, he says. Don't forget your parents are suffering too. Be compassionate with them. He and Phil's mother leave, but not before discussing Jacob's hunting trophy from 3 years ago, a giant buck mounted on the dining room wall. Plaster drifts down from the ceiling again like snow, and the crack in Phil's room widens. A shadow with a hunting hat and gun emerges, telling Phil how much of a disappointment he is, and that he'll get him out of the room, dead or alive. The gun goes off, and Phil wakes, screaming. His stomach hurts, and he vomits into the trash can. It hurts so much. He knocks on the wall for Piper, but she doesn't answer. He texts Noelle next. He needs medicine or something. What should he do? Noelle doesn't answer, and Phil can't stand the pain anymore. Maybe, just maybe, he can go downstairs while everyone sleeps and return without anyone noticing. Every movement agonizing and torturous, he moves the dresser, then his skis blocking the door. Then he undoes the latch and the lock. He just needs to be quick and quiet, and no one will ever know. He's done it. He's out the door and heading for the stairs, trying his best to hold back the vomit to no avail. His stomach gurgles and a light turns on in the kitchen. It's his mother getting a glass of water. He hides from her in the hallway until the light goes off and she leaves. Breathing a sigh of relief, he enters the bathroom and finds painkillers. He's about to leave the bathroom, hoping that no one will find him, when his phone goes off. He's finally completed his first 100 steps this month, the health app beeping and flashing on his screen. Welcome back to a healthy, active life, it reads. Did anyone hear that? He wonders. Cautiously, he leaves the bathroom, and in the dark, 2 shadows are just outside the door. They're terrifying but gleeful as they exclaim, Phil, you finally left your room. I knew you'd make it, son. I'm so proud of you. Let's celebrate like a family. They sound like his mother and father, but look at them. What are they? He wakes. The stomach ache was all part of the dream, but his heart. He doesn't think he can take much more of this. Maybe these night terrors come from being so reclusive. He hears his parents at the door again. Piper has run away from home. She broke her boyfriend's arm 2 days ago, and now this? She pushed Jake, but the fall was bad, and now where has she gone? He texts Noelle, and like always, she comforts him. Noelle offers her therapist's number again, this time for Piper. But the Larners rely on the church in times of crisis, not a shrink, as Phil says. Noelle shares Piper's disappearance with her mother, and we learn that Piper ran away the month before as well. Brian enters the grocery store, glad he and Noelle hung out the night before. He even agrees to go with her to the anime convention. But cosplay plans will have to wait. Noelle's mother needs to see her in the office. It's her father. He has a tumor and he doesn't have much time left. Noelle cries in her mother's arms, lost and unsure of what to do. That night, Phil searches for Noelle with his telescope, but he can't find her anywhere. She's been offline for hours and he wants, no needs, to talk to her. Where are you? He wonders. The following day, we see Noelle has been crying a lot. She texts Phil, telling him about her father. She'll be flying to Chicago tomorrow to be by his side. She doesn't know when she'll be coming back, but she wants to be with him through it all. She may be gone for months. The panic is stronger than ever before as Noelle writes about her new future without Phil. Online classes, Brian taking her job at the grocery store. Phil pleads with her to stay because he needs her. He can't lose her, he just can't. She's the only person who cares about him in this town. Fuck you, Phil. I love you, but you're being a selfish asshole, Noelle tells him at last. Her father's dying, but Phil, overcome with fear, threatens to do something crazy if she leaves. "You're the only thing that keeps me going," he cries. "Please stay. I promise to do better, to be the person you want me to be." He throws his phone to the ground in frustration, screaming. He paces the room, his head to his hands. No, this can't be happening. Images tinted red fill his mind. The monster, a broken vase. Piper, her face cracked like a porcelain doll. The buck in the dining room. It's too much for Phil to see over and over again. Noelle is angry at his emotional blackmail, but even still tells Phil that nothing will change. They'll keep texting one another just like they do now. "It'll be fine, Phil. Phil? Phil?" He screams and he hears Piper's voice. "Phil, remember." He bashes his head into the wall and passes out. Blood splatters the phone as Noelle continues to text. "Don't you dare leave me like this. You're scaring me. Please answer." But Phil can't respond. He's lying on the floor, his eyes twitching and following something we can't see in his room, his head seeping blood onto the floor. It's the shadows speaking to him. "You still don't remember, do you?" He sees them, all three of them standing over him now. "It's us," they say. "Remember." At Noelle's house, she's crying and her mother enters the room. She's worried about Phil, afraid he'll have a mental breakdown without her. Her mother suggests telling Phil's parents, especially if she thinks he's a danger to himself. Noelle agrees and calls the Larners, but no one answers. Maybe they're just out looking for Piper. She decides to go to Phil's house to make sure he's all right, her mother joining her. Phil is still on the ground, his mind fractured as he begins to see the truth. Piper appears to him, blood pouring from her mouth. "Phil, remember now?" He's in another memory, one from the month before, shortly before he locked himself away in his room. The police found Piper sleeping at a bus station, heading to Los Angeles. Her father calls her a stupid fool, and over it all, she goes to her room and blares her music. Later, Jacob commands Phil to go upstairs and drag Piper down for dinner. They're going to eat together like a real family for once, whether she wants to or not. Phil goes upstairs and calls out to Piper, but she doesn't answer, the music still blaring as Phil walks into her room. She's gone. Has she ran away again that quickly? He turns off the music and heads downstairs to search. Suddenly, Piper appears out of her father's study, holding a rifle. She cuts the power to the house, and Noelle and her mom are outside, back in the present. Noelle throws a rock at Phil's window, but he doesn't answer. They decide to ring the doorbell, and it's pitch dark within the house, but if you notice outside, the streetlights are on, so it's not another power outage. Maybe no one is home. The mailbox is stuffed with letters. Do the Larners not check their mail often? Noelle rings the bell, but no one answers. What if Phil's dead? They have to go in. She knows something is wrong. They find a spare key hidden on the porch. Noelle opens the front door and asks her mother to stay outside in case her presence in the house upsets Phil further. She enters alone and is immediately hit with a horrid smell from within the house. She reaches for the light switch, turns it on, and finds something horrific. Seated at the dining room table are the decomposing bodies of Phil's mother and father, each with a singular bullet hole to the head. At the far end of the room is Piper's body, the rifle still by her side. Phil finally knows what happened in this house, or rather, he finally remembers. Piper grabbed the rifle from their father's study, flipped the breaker in the house, and shot their mother and father in darkness. Phil falls to the floor, his mind reeling, hyperventilating as the panic attack begins for the very first time. Piper looks into the dining room mirror, now broken from the chaos. Her reflection cracked and splintered, she walks past her brother, sits on the ground, and takes her own life. The bullet exits through the back of her skull, leaving a large crack in the ceiling. Phil finally comes to in his room. Realization sinking in, he has to go downstairs to look for answers, to see if his mind is once again betraying him. How he hopes it's betraying him. He calls out for his mother and father, but this time, there's no monster. No hallucination of his parents calling out to him from the door. There's only the cracked dining room mirror, the gruesome scene before him, and Noelle. Noelle thinks Phil is a monster and screams for him to stay away from her. The monsters from before each reappear beside his family. He had seen it all, had seen Piper falling into the abyss, and he should have done more. He passes out and Noelle's mother enters, seeing everything. Noelle instructs her to call the police quickly. As the first responders arrive, we see Phil being carried away on a stretcher. Noelle asks the sheriff if Phil will be okay. He's in shock and dehydrated, but he'll recover, according to the doctors. She blames herself, thinking she was too blind to it all. But no one knows what people are going through. Not really. We each suffer our own hell in silence, the sheriff tells her. And our safe spaces are only figments of our imagination. Midnight Scenes, A Safe Place, was extremely unsettling because this kind of story unfortunately is reenacted time and time again in reality. It tears us away from our comfort zones and forces us to confront something that is all too real. There are secrets in every house, and some are darker than others. The Larner's secret was the fracturing within their family. The abusive father, the passive mother, the distant older brother, and the rebellious, hurting sister. All within a house that seems well and good on the outside but breaking within, just like the appearances they tried so hard to uphold. And as the ending of the game suggests, it's a horrifying feeling when the place we thought was safest is, well, not. There's a clear lack of communication, empathy, and understanding between these family members. They rely on force and religion to overcome everything, and I'm not saying their faith is a bad thing. Faith can be comforting, but sometimes religion alone isn't enough to heal. Sometimes we need resources like therapy and medicine to work alongside faith to better cope. But the Larners didn't believe in this approach. I believe Phil might have suffered from brief psychotic disorder, triggered by the events that took place that night, among other factors. The National Institute of Mental Health refers to psychosis as a collection of symptoms that affect the mind. These symptoms include some loss of contact with reality, with difficulty recognizing what is real and what is not. There are also delusions such as false beliefs the individual is receiving special messages, and visual and auditory hallucinations, which Phil experienced. He also exhibits the behavioral warning signs that accompany psychosis: withdrawing socially, trouble thinking clearly and logically, lack of self-care and personal hygiene, disruption of sleep, suspiciousness, paranoia, uneasiness with others. You get the idea. If he in fact is experiencing brief psychotic disorder, this would also explain why he was able to realize the truth at the end of the game. Sometimes these one-off events can begin to lessen on their own, with full recovery possible with proper treatment and support. But I found it interesting that his psyche was constantly sending him subliminal messages about the truth. During the scene where he requires a password for the computer, the necessary word was Prospero. A character from Shakespeare's play The Tempest, Prospero is a powerful sorcerer who can control people and monsters. He can use his magic to create a storm that brings his enemies under his control. If you remember, a snowstorm raged on throughout the game, causing a blackout, but when Noelle and her mother went to the Larner's house, the power was on, the weather snowy, but not a blizzard. At least not one so dreadful that they couldn't walk in it. So many of the game's events could have been part of Phil's night terrors and not reality. Perhaps the storm itself was another part of the hallucination, created to give his true fear and confusion another focal point and a false explanation for why his family was always present in the house. Prospero's character is almost mostly responsible for generating the play's plot using his magic and schemes. He's a metaphor for the power of Phil's mind and how it constructs the monsters to veil the truth. Then if Puzzle Inferno is a reference to Dante's Inferno, we see some parallels to Phil's story here as well. Phil, like Dante Alighieri, the author, never really experienced the literal hell, but rather it was all constructed from their mind and perception. But in another sense, Dante's story mirrors Phil's as he descends into a dark, tormented realm, and for Phil it could be an allegory as he journeys through this traumatic experience. Then there's the monsters themselves with the gunshot wounds, the crack in the ceiling, seeing Piper's cracked reflection. All these things grounded in reality that have become distorted but still present in Phil's mind. And then there's Piper, who committed parricide and took her own life. Parasite, which is intentionally ironic because it goes against the idea of honoring parents, a value present in Christianity that Mr. Larner demanded from his children. Phil recalled seeing Piper falling further into an abyss, one where no support could be found. One of the prominent researchers of Parasite, Dr. Kathleen Heide, created categories for those who commit this act. Those who suffer from parent abuse, who suffer severe mental illness, who have antisocial personality disorder, and those who feel rage toward their parents with some form of mental illness existing within each category. And as always, this doesn't mean that every person who experiences these factors goes on to do something unthinkable, but considering what little we know about Piper, we see some abuse from her father. We saw the rage she had toward him and her mother as well. She indicates her loneliness and feeling overwhelmed, and at the end of it all, we see her pain. This video was tough to make and heavier than the usual, so the next one will be far less gruesome, I hope. Discussing something so similar to true crime was unsettling for me because it feels like we're talking about real people. A Safe Place was fiction, but the stories rooted in reality are sometimes the most haunting. And the reality for Phil was that he spent over a month locked away upstairs and inside his mind, while his family decayed below him. I'd love to know your thoughts about everything in the comments section, and I hope I approached this video in a way that didn't harm or offend anyone. A Safe Place is only one of 5 games within the Midnight Scene series, so there's a lot more to explore from the developer, if desired. Thank you so much for watching. Here's another one of my videos, and as always, may your nightmares be strangely cozy.